everyone, welcome to another day, another made-for-TV drama, where we go back in time and reevaluate all of those classic TV suspense dramas with a new pair of eyes. Were they really as great as we remembered? Do they stand the test of time? I will discuss all of that and more. My name is Jennifer Rainier Woods, and I am the author of the new book, Deadly Guide, The Search for the Killer Made-for-TV Thriller. It is available to purchase as an ebook on Barnes & Noble's Nook or Nook app, and also as a paperback for a little more money because, as we know, the cost of labor is rising these days. So isn't it nice to be able to sit back and enjoy a little free podcast from time to time where you can listen to someone like me drone on about all the thrilling, suspenseful movies out there that are easily accessible to you on platforms such as Amazon Video, Freevee, and Tubi. And of course, there's always YouTube. For my first episode, I decided to discuss The Face on the Milk Carton, as it is one of the first TV movies I remember watching as a kid. It stars Kellie Martin and is based on the best-selling young adult book series that centers on the main character of Janie Johnson, who in the movie goes by Janie Jessamine, as you know, that movies love to change those one or two details, sometimes more, as the case may be. It's one of the first TV movies I remember anxiously anticipating as a young girl. I had just read the first 2 or 3 books. My grandmother had bought me the first book at a garage sale or church sale or something of that nature, and I remember her holding it out to me saying, "Hey, look what I got for you." She must have known I was always looking for a good kidnapping tale to read. It was the early 90s when I first started the series, and everywhere I looked there were posters of missing children. This was a little after the missing kids on milk cartons phase. Now it was missing posters at the local ice cream stand, taped to a toll booth, or on the designated wall at Toys R Us. So when the movie first came out in 1995, I was so excited. This was back in the days of VCRs, so I'm sure a big thing was made about making sure I had control of the television that night it first aired. And when I found out it would condense the first 2 books into one movie, I'm sure I was all on board with that. Of course, I must have been aware of the potential pitfalls of trying to cram 2 books worth of material into a 90-minute window of time. It meant many scenes I loved would probably have to get the axe. It's hard enough to fit 1 book into an hour-and-a-half movie, but I think they did a decent job of it, as well as they possibly could have. I'm going to begin by giving a brief summary of the movie without getting into any spoilers, and then I will discuss some of the issues I had with the movie versus some of the things I thought it did well. The Face on the Milk Carton opens with a teenager named Janie who is anxious to get her license. In the book, she was about 15. In the movie, she might be 16. It's clear that she's trying to get her license, so I'm thinking she's probably 16. She lives in a nice home with 2 typical parents who are perhaps a bit older than the other parents of the other kids her age. But this was the 90s, and all adults looked about 60 to me back then. Even as an adult now, it seems the adults back then look so much older than the adults of their same age range today. But moving on, the central conflict begins when Janie is at lunch at school one day and glimpses a little girl in the back of a milk carton. She is suddenly struck by a memory of being that little girl. Janie is deeply disturbed because she knows that if she is that little girl all grown up, that must mean that her beloved parents kidnapped her. And she can't bring herself to accept that. How could the parents she loves and trusts do that to someone else's little 3-year-old girl? Not to mention what her bio family must be going through not knowing what happened to her. Well, assuming the memories she's having are legit and not some adolescent fantasy. Teens always have to be the victim in one sad story or another, as we all know. But it certainly doesn't help that the Jessamines don't have photos of her as a baby lying around. What kind of parents don't have baby photos that they shove in strangers' faces at every possible opportunity? Where are the embarrassing bath pics that would get them reported to Child Protective Services these days? Her parents give her some lame excuse. They never got around to buying a camera or taking her to some professional photographer until she was the same age as that little missing milk carton girl. Isn't that convenient? Janie doesn't buy it. And eventually her parents admit that she's not their daughter. She's their prodigal daughter's kid instead, so she's their granddaughter. And now some cult is probably out to get her. It all seems a little too convenient of an explanation, almost like a cover story. Meanwhile, Janie and her new boyfriend, the good-looking boy next door named Reeve, do a bit of investigating on their own, and they find out this little girl is not being hunted by some cult. She's got decent, honest kinfolk out there looking for her, all with red hair just like hers, a shining beacon flashing through all of the lies Janie has been fed her whole life. Now, why Janie didn't start researching the kidnapping in the library, on the microfiche machine from the start is anyone's guess. Maybe because then the reader-viewer wouldn't have been misdirected with a long-lost daughter narrative. But in all fairness, Janie doesn't want to believe the worst-case scenario could be true, and that's understandable. I don't want to spoil the end, but I will say that the second half of the movie has to do with Janie discovering the truth of her parentage and being forced to live with her real parents, which means she has to leave her loving parents and her close friends behind. Not to mention her boyfriend. I mean, that's got to be tough, leaving poor little Reeve behind. It's a real Solomon's Choice type situation, as one character points out at one point in the film. Who has the rightful claim on Janie? Do her feelings count for anything? So now that you know what the movie is overall about, I'm going to discuss what I thought about it. My gripes as a child were mainly superficial. They were as follows. First of all, I remember being very disappointed that the missing girl in the movie, Jennifer Sands, did not have pigtails. In the book, she clearly did. Her name was Jenny Spring in the book, and she had pigtails. Much was made about these pigtails. In the book, they were referred to as braids. On the cover, they were ponytails, and she had brown hair on the cover too, I might add, which goes to show you these cover artists don't give a flying flip about staying true to the source material. But they were still pigtails. Bottom line, in the movie, there were no ponytails, no braids, barely any hair, I might add. She had this little bob cut, like they did that deliberately to spite fans of the book. Not only were they not going to give her pigtails, they were going to chop off all her hair. Seriously? I wonder if it might have been Kellie Martin's baby picture, because it did look a lot like her. And the photo of young Jenny was adorable. I'm not saying it wasn't. Just, she wasn't the Jenny I came to know and love from the book. So sad. But what are you going to do? Secondly, Jennifer Sands. That was the name of the missing girl in the movie. In the book, her name was Jenny Spring, which I liked so much better. I think that was the first time I'd ever seen the name spelled like that, Jennie. In the movie, you don't get to see the spelling because it's just spoken. And then the last name of Sands instead of Spring. When I heard the name Spring, I always thought of it like spring water, as opposed to the season, and I think that's what whoever wrote the screenplay must have thought of too when they came up with the name Sands, because it has that same naturey sound to it. But I just like the name Spring better. Like I said, that's me being superficial. And then there was the casting of Kellie Martin. Don't get me wrong, I love Kellie Martin. I used to watch her in Life Goes On. She did a fantastic job in Death of a Cheerleader. She really made you feel for a character who you would think you could never sympathize with until you see her in that movie. And she was also great in the Face on the Milk Carton too. Maybe she's just really good at writing letters while she reads them aloud in her mind. It occurred to me that she did that in Death of a Cheerleader and again in this movie. She wrote letters, and you heard the letter be read aloud in her voice, and you could just feel her inner turmoil. Forget acting. Give her a role as a voice actor. That's all she needs in order to succeed. So I'm glad she played the part. It's just her hair. You can't tell me that that's her natural hair. We know it's not because we've seen her in other things, but even if I hadn't, it looked like someone had just dumped some food coloring on her head and called it good. As an adult watching in the movie now, it's really not that bad. I mean, she's passable as a redhead. But in the book, much was made about how Janie had these thick red curls. It was hammered into the reader's head again and again. Like it was like Reeve had some fetish with her curly red hair. I mean, it was really that bad. So I couldn't take Kellie seriously as Janie because she didn't have the hair. That was not Janie's hair. It was like she was some imposter Janie. Like the hair and makeup crew did the absolute bare minimum so that she would look like she maybe came from a family of redheads. And something else I didn't think about until now. How did it never occur to me until now? Wouldn't Janie have had pictures at age 3 or 4 that would have looked identical to that little girl in the milk carton? I mean, I can't remember if that was ever addressed in the book, but it seems like that would have been a dead giveaway, even more so than some hazy memory she dredged up from the distant past. But all those petty grievances aside, it was still a movie that stands out as being a favorite of mine, one that I don't mind rewatching from time to time. I know there were people who didn't care for the ending because they thought it was too sad or something, but I think it had ended in the best way it possibly could. I just wish there could have been a follow-up, like there was with the book series. I wish they could have adapted the third book. It was so sweet to see the way the siblings interacted with each other just a year or so later. And in the book, Jenny actually has 4 siblings, an older brother, an older sister, and then 2 younger brothers who are twins. And in the third book, she has such a sweet relationship with her older sister and her younger brother, one of the twins. The other twin is like kind of off doing his own thing, you know, being useless to the plot. Now, fans of Reeve might hate the third book, but I won't spoil it for you in case you want to read it out of curiosity, though I figure if you haven't read it by now, you're probably not going to because you're probably 40 now, and who wants to read a book for 12-year-olds when they're 40? But if you're anything like me, you might do it anyways. I thought the ending was very emotional. To this day, it still makes me bawl like a little 3-year-old child. Not the 3-year-old Jenny, because the movie makes it quite clear she skipped off happily with her abductress, but you get the picture. It's such a poignant message about true love. The ending, like I just loved the message of the ending, and I thought it did a really good job. Now, some things I liked. As a preteen, that kiss in the pile of leaves was everything. The book was pretty hardcore for a 10-year-old back in the day, I should add, and that's how old I was when I first read it. The R.L. Stine Fear Street books I also read at the time did not talk openly and candidly about sex in the same way. Not that it was graphic, it just was pretty scandalous to a preteen in that time period, that day and age, in the early 90s. The movie did not go there, but that's fine. The actor who played Reeve, I mean, he had the wavy parted hair in the middle. That was the look back in the days. Funny how that was all it took to make girls go wild back then. I like to think I have higher standards now. Richard Mazur plays Jenny's bio dad, and it's funny because he was also in a very similar movie called Always Remember I Love You, starring Patty Duke and Stephen Dorff. It's a movie about a boy who finds out that he was adopted in a black market adoption, and that the parents he grew up knowing as his parents were actually unwitting pawns in the kidnapping of a toddler over 10 years earlier. He seeks out his bio parents. His real father is played by none other than Richard Mazur, so it's kind of cool that Mazur played the same kind of role in this newer movie too. And I thought Sharon Lawrence did a great job as the bio mother of Jenny. I also could have sworn she was a younger looking Susan Sarandon. When she recounts the day of the kidnapping for Janie, it's a really powerful scene. She seems a bit nutty at times, but that's probably her being so frazzled by the situation, which is understandable. And, you know, I grew up with parents like that, so I get it. You know, my parents didn't go through the kidnapping of their 3-year-old child, but, you know, they had the kids who didn't call home and, you know, went off gallivanting and then showed up at like 9 or 10 at night and, you know, arrive home to the police. So, you know, same kind of thing. Big brother Stephen Sands did a great job at being an arrogant, obnoxious older sibling. The girl who played younger sister Jodie was good too. She just seemed a lot different than the Jodie in the book. Kind of like a bland version of book Jodie. Kind of like store-brand mac and cheese, if you will, with some orange powdered substance sprinkled on top. Whereas book Jodie was Velveeta. And that's not the actress's fault. She was not written to be the kind of firecracker that her character was in the book. She did well with what she was given to work with. All the actors were good. Jill Clayburgh is always a pleasure to watch. The actors playing Janie's teen friends now, as an adult, make me long for those school days of the 90s. Kids on shows aren't that carefree anymore. Now they've got all these principles. And no, not that kind of principle. the kind of principles that make teen movies and television programs so much more of a chore to get through these days. Or maybe I'm just being an old fart. But I'm pretty sure I felt that way at age 12 too, that kids in 2023 were no fun. Overall, I would give this movie a 4 out of 5 stars. Or, if you will, 4 little milk cartons sitting on a conveyor belt waiting for the picture of some pigtailless child to be slapped on the back of them. So that's it, folks. That was my review of The Face on the Milk Carton, 1995, starring Kellie Martin in the lead role, based on the 90s book series for young adults by Caroline B. Cooney, the queen of point horror back in the day. The first book was called The Face on the Milk Carton. Surprise, surprise. The second book was called Whatever Happened to Janie. And then there were a few others in the never-ending series that I think came later than 1995. I'm not sure about the voice on the radio, but I know she kept pumping out the books. Even as recently as a few years ago, she released a book that basically reworked the plot so that it took place in the Facebook era, which is weird. But anyways, that was my review. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you watch my future episodes. And if you're looking for a good read that will, honor those classic TV movies you'd like to watch back in the day, I did just release a book, Deadly Guide, The Search for the Killer Made for TV Thriller, which reviews about 20 movies, has an actor index of all, the well-known actors of that time, not all the well-known actors of the time, but many of them, and then also has several movies from the early 90s organized by keywords, plot summaries. It's kind of like an index of all those old movies from the early 90s, so it's a great resource if you're interested. Anyways, until next time, my name is Jennifer Rainier Woods, and have a great night.